Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bugün İzmir Dilbilim Çevresi olarak 126.sını düzenlediğimiz bir konuşmayla daha beraberiz. Bugünkü konuşmacımız Orta Doğu Teknik Üniversitesi Modern Bilimler bölümünden Doktor Alper Kesici. Kendisi bize Yip Constructions in Turkish, Subject Licensing and Adjunction Height başka konuşmasıyla katkı sağlayacak. Ben tekrar davetimizi kabul edip geldiği, sunumunu bizimle paylaşacağı için çok teşekkür ederim. Hocam sözü size bırakıyorum. Dilediğiniz zaman hazır olduğunuzda başlayabilirsiniz.
Tabii. Ben de beni ağırladığınız için bugün teşekkür ederim Murat Hocama, İzmir Dilbilim çevresine
Teşekkür ederim.
ve gelen dinleyicilere teşekkür ediyorum tekrardan. Em, İngilizceye geçiş yapacağım
Tabii.
konuşmamda. So, hello everyone again. Today I will be presenting my study entitled Deep Constructions in Turkish, Subject Licensing and Adjunction Height. And in this study, I investigate yip constructions in Turkish, and this marker yip can be used to mark different structures. For example, it can be used to mark embedded yes/no questions. Can'ın kitabı alıp almadığını bilmiyorum. I don't know whether Can bought the book or not. Or it can mark auxiliary constructions. Şan derslerine gidip duruyor, where the finite verb is usually dur or kal, and the action is denoted by the yip marked verb. The finite verb only denotes, for example, duration or iteration. Or it can mark serial verb constructions. Kadın evi silip süpürdü. The woman cleaned the house. The yip marked verb and the finite verb, they denote a single action. And they can also mark adjunct clauses, which I argue for. Bu parçayı ben söküp takabilirim. I can remove this part and install it back. Here, the yip marked verb and the finite verb denote distinct events. And here, in this study, I focus on this construction in four, leaving the other uses of the marker for future research. And in my study, I focus on three different mutually intertwined aspects of yip constructions in four in the previous page. The status of the yip constituent as adjunct or conjunct. And I argue that the yip constituent is an adjunct. And the status of the subject of the yip constituent. And I propose an analysis saying that basically the yip constituent introduced its own subject regulated under Chomsky's form copy and licensed via Pesesky and Torrego's feature sharing mechanism, and the position of the yip constituent in the causal spine. So I argue that there are three possible positions for the yip constituent to adjoin to. These are neck P, little vp, and vp. First, the basis of my argument is that the yip constituent is an adjunct, and depending on this analysis, I provide a more detailed account on the subjects and the position of the yip constituent in the causal spine. And the reason why I'm going for an adjunction analysis is because of the differences and the differences in yip constructions and their coordination on some criteria proposed as diagnostic for subordination versus coordination. For example, the first one comes from variable position. Subordinate clauses can occupy different positions in the main clause without a change in the interpretation of the sentence. And the temporal coordinate clauses, for example, cannot. For example, in 5, Can ülkeye dönüp yeni bir ev aldı. Here we can change the position of the yip constituent. Can yeni bir ev ülkeye dönüp aldı, or Can yeni bir ev aldı ülkeye dönüp. Both sentences, all three sentences would mean Can first returned to the country and then bought a new house. This is not the case for their coordination. Can ülkeye döndü ve yeni bir ev aldı. Means Can first returned to the country and then bought a new house. In 6b, if we change the order of the conjuncts, then we have a difference in meaning. So Can yeni bir ev aldı ve ülkeye döndü. Means Can first bought a new house and then returned to the country. And the second criteria is restrictiveness and focusability offered by Haspelmath. Coordinate clauses cannot be interpreted restrictively, and therefore they cannot be focused. Subordinate clauses can. So in 7a we have the if construction. Kapıyı çarpıp mı çıktın? The question particle mı can be placed on the if constituent, meaning did you leave slamming the door? But this is not the case for 7b when we have V coordination. Kapıyı çarptın mı ve çıktın, or kapıyı çarptın ve mi çıktın? Both uses are not acceptable. This marks the second difference between V coordination and if constructions. And also extraction. So the whole if constituent can be extracted while a conjunct in a coordinate structure cannot. So here we have a base sentence in 8a for the if construction. Can şapkasını çıkarıp Oya'yı selamladı. This if construction can be rightward extracted and the sentence is still grammatical. So Can Oya'yı selamladı şapkasını çıkarıp, meaning that taking off his hat, Can greeted Oya. But this is not possible for V coordination. Can şapkasını çıkardı ve Oya'yı selamladı. Here we cannot extract the first conjunct with or without the coordination word ve. So Can Oya'yı selamladı, şapkasını çıkardı ve, or Can ve Oya'yı selamladı, şapkasını çıkardı. Both uses are unacceptable. And finally we have negation scope ambiguity, which is noted in the literature previously as well. So negation in a single conjunct cannot scope over the other matrix. The other matrix negation can optionally scope over a subordinate clause. So here we have in 10a the if constituent. Eve gidip duş almadım. This sentence is ambiguous between two different interpretations. I went home or I didn't go home. In either case, I didn't take a shower. In 10b, this is not possible when we have V coordination. Eve gittim ve duş almadım. Here we only have one interpretation, and that interpretation is I went home but did not take a shower. And based on this criteria, I thought that like the adjunction analysis is more suitable for the nature of the if constituent. And from there, I will move on to the subjects of if constructions. And one of the main focuses of this study is the subjects of if constructions. Here we have three different patterns. In 11, we have no overt subject. Bugün çalışıp yarın gidecek. She or he will work today and leave tomorrow. We have no overt subject, and this null subject is interpreted as the subject of both the if constituent and the finite constituent. The same goes for 12, where we have single overt subject. Ali eve gelip uyudu. Here we have only one overt subject, and this subject is interpreted as the subject of both the if marked verb and the finite verb. And we can have multiple overt subjects. Bu adamı Ahmet tutup sen vuracaksın. Ahmet will restrain this man while you hit him, or we can have the subject of the same kind. Bu adamı sen tutup sen vuracaksın. So you will restrain this man and you will hit him. And these are the patterns. And in my account, I try to propose an analysis that basically covers all three patterns of the subjects of the if constructions. And the first one is, as in 11 and 12, we have no overt subject and single overt subject. And form copy, I think, can be used to regulate the subjects of if constructions where we have no overt subject or single overt subject. An example is given in 14, koşup oynadım. I ran and played. And in if constructions in which the subjects are interpreted as co-referential for both the if marked verb and the finite verb, they are regulated under form copy. And form copy is an operation that takes two identical inscriptions. We can call them phrases within the same phase and renders them as copies. So here we have an example tree, and the phrases can be externally merged, or they can also be internally merged. it doesn't matter for form copy. And if they are in the same phase and the higher and one of the copies C command the other, FC applies and both phrases are identified as copies, and the lower copy deletes at PF. This is at least what Chomsky proposes. However, I assume a bit like deletion under FC is generally arbitrary, and I assume that the higher copy, the lower copy, or both copies can be deleted at PF, or both copies can be pronounced. And this deletion is obligatory if a copy is unlicensed, for example, when it lacks case, and we will see an example of that later in the slides. So let's see how form copy operates in a if construction. Here we have the sentence, ben koşup oynadım, I ran and played. And here we have the structure for the tree without the subjects merged. So ben is merged as the subject of the if, subject of the matrix clause. And before that, so the reason why I go for form copy instead of the more traditional accounts like big pro or small pro is because of this. So let's see if big pro account works. So if you posit a big pro as the subject of the if constituent, this account can regulate the if constructions where we have single overt subject or no overt subject. But this is not, this big pro analysis is not compatible with cases where we have an overt subject inside the if constituent. So ben koşup ben oynadım. In other types of constructions, for example, in Arak constructions, this is still not possible. Ben koşarak ben oynadım. You cannot say that. So I thought big pro analysis is not very compatible with the subject of the if constructions. And also, a similar analysis can be proposed for small pro. This account also, I think, fails because of the obligatory co-reference between the subjects of the if construction, if constituent, and the matrix clause. And again, this is not what we find in other types of adjunct clauses. For example, koşunca oynadım, the subject of the adjunct clause can be anything. So this is again not compatible with the subject of the if constituent. So anyway, then when we have single identical subjects when we have identical if constructions, identical subject if constructions, I propose that the subject of the if constituent is not big pro or small pro, but it is a copy of the matrix clause. So it is identical to the subject of the matrix clause. After the matrix instance of the subject then undergoes movement to spec TP, form copy applies. And if you delete the lower two copies after this operation, meaning that the subject of the if constituent and the instance of ben in the matrix clause in spec little VP, we end up with the sentence ben koşup oynadım. And if we delete all three instances, then we derive the sentence koşup oynadım. But as we have seen earlier, the if constituent can host an overt subject. And this subject can be identical to or distinct from the matrix subject. So ben koşup ben oynadım, I ran and I played, or Ali koşup Ayşe oynadı. We can have distinct subjects. Ali ran and Ayşe played. And these subjects need nominative case. And we also need a licensing mechanism that allows sentences like 16 and 17, and this allows sentences like 18. So we cannot have any subject as a subject of the if constituent. Sen koşup ben oynadım is unacceptable. You ran and I played under the intended meaning. So I propose an analysis, and I say that this can be achieved under Kesici and Torrego's feature sharing. So in Kesici and Torrego's system, there are 4 different feature and value combinations: interpretable and valued, interpretable and unvalued, uninterpretable and valued, and uninterpretable and unvalued. And unvalued features, regardless of their interpretability, acts as probes. And a probe may undergo agree multiple times, and once valuation occurs, the value spreads to earlier agree links. So here's an example tree. In this derivation, we have three different heads with three different features. On X head, we have the interpretable and unvalued feature. On Z head, we have the uninterpretable feature that is unvalued. And on the Y head, we have the uninterpretable feature that is valued. And under this feature sharing mechanism, we will see that the value on the feature on Y head will be spread to both the features on X head and Z head. Since we have X as the highest head, and it is the only head that has like features under in its C commanding domain that its feature can probe, agree one happens between the interpretable feature on X and uninterpretable feature on Z, because Z, the feature on Z head is the highest head, the closest head, the closest feature to the feature on the X head. And since both of these features are unvalued, no valuation occurs, but now these features are linked permanently. So any value obtained by the interpretable feature on X will be also carried to the uninterpretable feature on Z head. And feature on X head probes for a second time. This time agree 2 happens between the feature on X and the feature on Y. And since the feature on Y head is valued, valuation occurs, and this value is spread to both the interpretable feature on X and the uninterpretable feature on Z. So under feature sharing, tense enters the derivation with an interpretable T feature that is unvalued and an uninterpretable phi feature that is unvalued. And I propose that this phi feature agreement is parasitic on T agreement. I assume that. And subjects enter the derivation with an uninterpretable T feature that is unvalued. And once this feature is valued, the subject receives nominative case. And an interpretable phi feature that is valued. And finite little v enters the derivation with an uninterpretable T feature that is valued. So here we have the same sentence, koşup oynadım, iron and plate, and let's see how we can assign nominative case to the subject of the constituent. So ben koşup ben oynadım. Here we have the matrix little vp. Ben enters the derivation with a T feature that is unvalued and a phi feature that is valued. And we have little v hat that enters the derivation with an uninterpretable T feature that is valued. And T feature on Ben probes and agrees with T feature on little v. Since we have a valued feature that is probed, valuation occurs, and the subject receives nominative case. Next, the constituent and matrix T is merged. The subject of the constituent is Ben, and it enters the derivation with the same feature set as its matrix counterpart. And T hat enters the derivation with an interpretable T feature that is unvalued and an uninterpretable phi feature that is unvalued. And this T feature on T probes and finds the closest goal with which to agree, and this is the T feature on the subject of the matrix constituent, because the Yip constituent is merged higher than the subject of the matrix clause. So no valuation occurs, T valuation, because both of these features are unvalued, but the features are now linked as indicated by the bracketed 2. And agree 2 as a parasitic operation on T agreement also happens between the interpretable phi feature on Ben inside the constituent and the uninterpretable phi feature on T. Valuation this time occurs. And since the T feature on T is still invalid, it props for a second time. Degree 3 happens between the T features on T and the matrix instance of Ben. Valuation occurs this time. And this valuation, as a result of this valuation, the subject of the if constituent also receives nominative case. And we also, as a parasitic operation on T feature agreement, the uninterpretable phi feature on T has to probe again and agree with the interpretable phi feature on the matrix instance of Ben, and we have a revaluation. I will go back to this revaluation issue in just a moment. So before that, after both subjects receive case, the matrix instance of Ben raises the spec TP to satisfy the EPP. And after this movement, form copy applies between all three instances of Ben, rendering them as copies, an operation we have already seen. And if only the instance of Ben in the matrix spec little VP is deleted, and Ben in site the constituent and spec TP is pronounced. And if this is the case, the if constituent undergoes movement to spec copy, because such a movement is necessary because, for example, you cannot say ben koşup oynadım. So whenever we have an over subject inside the if constituent that precedes the matrix subject, a movement which is proposed by Crom, and I adopted in my analysis. And going back to the revaluation of the phi features on T, and this revaluation, I propose that it is what restricts the subjects of the if constituent. The person value that revalues the phi feature on T must be non-distinct from the value of phi feature on T. So here we have a revaluation from first person singular to first person singular. So these two features are the same and they are non-distinct. So these values are non-distinct when either we have the same value, so the same subject as the matrix subject and the subject of the if constituent, or where we have a third person subject inside the if constituent. So, and I assume that this is because third person is the lack of person features in the five feature set. So here we have the same sentence, and we will change the subject of the if constituent. So we now have Ali as the subject of the if constituent, a third person subject. And so it enters the derivation Ali with a T feature that is unvalued, and then interpretable phi feature that is, it says now third person singular, but since I assume that third person is the lack of person features, I will represent it as with underscore. And again, T agreement happens just as we have seen. No valuation occurs on T features, and the phi feature on T receives the default interpretation because of this agreement between the third person and T head. And another instance of T agreement occurs. This time, T agreement happens between the matrix instance of Ben and matrix T. Valuation occurs. The subject of the if constituent receives case, nominative case, and we also have a revaluation of the phi features. So I believe this is not, these are not, so I'm sorry, so I believe this is acceptable. And the reason why Stan as the subject of the if constituent is not possible when we have another subject, a distinct subject inside the matrix clause, ben koşup ben oynadım, is because of this phi feature revaluation. So here we have Sen as the subject of the if constituent. It enters the derivation with a T feature that is unvalued and a phi feature that is valued second person singular. T agreement occurs and no T valuation occurs, but phi features are valued to second person singular. And agree, another instance of agree happens. And this time we have the T feature evaluation for both the matrix T and the subject of the constituent. And we also have a revaluation from second person singular to first person singular. And revaluation from second person singular to second person to first person is not possible because these features are not non-distinct. And so this is basically my account for the subjects of the constituent. And I also consider the height of the constituent in the closal spine, and that has some consequences for the subjects of the constituent as well. So I argue that, so first of all, different adjunction sites for the constituent have already been proposed. And I argue that the constituent can adjoin to three different sites, make P, little vp, and vp. And evidence for these sites comes from the interaction between matrix negation, MPI licensing patterns, and the interpretation of the constituent. And this MPI licensing pattern and the interaction of the, like in the interpretation of the YIP constituent and the MPI licensing patterns, I believe it is not observed in the literature so far. So here's an example. Caner hastaneye uğrayıp test yaptırmadı. Caner visited the hospital but did not get a test done. This is our first interpretation. And we can also interpret it as Caner did not visit the hospital and did not get a test done. So the YIP constituent hastaneye uğrayıp can be interpreted as negative or non-negative. And this is similar to how because clauses behave in English. So here we have an example sentence. Leo didn't sell his shares because the market was unstable. And this sentence is ambiguous. It can mean Leo didn't sell his shares and the reason was that the market was unstable. It can also mean Leo sold his shares, but not because the market was unstable. And Johnston argues for accounts for the differences, the ambiguity of the sentence via the different adjunction sites of the because clause. So when adjoined to TP, the reason clause is outside the scope of negation, and the interpretation is the reason was that the market was unstable. And when adjoined to little VP, the reason clause is under the scope of negation, and the interpretation is not because the market was unstable. And the ambiguity disappears when we introduce an NPI inside the matrix clause. So Leo didn't sell any shares because the market was unstable is no longer ambiguous. The sentence can only mean Leo didn't sell any shares, and the reason was that the market was unstable. And the interpretation Leo sold any shares, but not because the market was unstable, is not available. So the only interpretation in 24 is the reason was that the market was unstable for the reason clause. And the MPI can be licensed by the matrix negation. And the reason why little VP adjunction that yields, not because the market was unstable, is unavailable, is because the reason clause in this position intervenes between the matrix negation and the MPI. So the MPI is not licensed. And a similar logic can be, similar logic can be applied to YIP constructions. So Caner hastaneye uğrayıp test yaptırmadı. Here we have the same sentence. We have two different interpretations. Caner visited the hospital and Caner did not visit the hospital. Here we have the structure for the sentence. So when adjoined to neg P, the YIP constituent is outside the scope of negation and the interpretation is Caner visited the hospital. When adjoined to little vp or vp, the YIP constituent is under the scope of negation and the interpretation is Caner did not visit the hospital. And this provides evidence for the NECP adjunction of the if constituent because we have a non-negative interpretation for the if constituent. But whether the little VP or VP adjunction is responsible for the Caner did not visit the hospital interpretation remains to be seen. And we can use MPI licensing patterns to test this, similar to reason clauses in English. So Caner hastaneye uğrayıp hiçbir test yaptırmadı. Here we have only a single interpretation. Caner visited the hospital. The if constituent is interpreted as non-negative. And Caner didn't visit the hospital and didn't get any test done. Interpretation is disappears. And when an object MPI is present in the matrix clause, the if constituent can only adjoin to NECP, and the only interpretation is Caner visited the hospital. And the MPI is licensed by the matrix negation. But little VP or VP adjunction that yields Caner did not visit the hospital interpretation is unavailable because the if constituent intervenes between the matrix negation and the MPI. So in both positions, it would intervene. But this is not the case in 27, where we have the subject MPI. So kimse hastaneye uğrayıp test yaptırmadı. This sentence is again unambiguous, but this time the if constituent can only be interpreted as negative. So no one visited the hospital and got tested. Having visited the hospital, no one got tested. Interpretation is not available. NECP adjunction that yields having visited the hospital is unavailable because kimse inside the if constituent would be outside the scope of matrix negation. So it would not be licensed by the matrix negation, and this is why having visited the hospital interpretation is not available. And little VP adjunction that yields no one visited the hospital is also unavailable because the constituent intervenes between the matrix negation and the subject MPI. And VP adjunction that yields no one visited the hospital must be available because kimse inside the if constituent is under the scope of matrix negation and it is in a non-intervening position. So the reading no one visited the hospital and got tested, this is derived by the VP adjunction of the if constituent. And this provides evidence for the VP adjunction of the if constituent because only in this position the if constituent does not block the MPI licensing in the matrix clause. And so here we have three sentences. So in 28 we have the same. Kimse hastaneye uğrayıp test yaptırmadı. Unambiguous. It can only have one interpretation. No one visited the hospital. And we have in 29 an ungrammatical sentence. So kimse hastaneye uğrayıp kimse test yaptırmadı is ungrammatical. And in 30 we have, so when we change the subject of the if constituent from kimse to herkes, the sentence becomes grammatical. Herkes hastaneye uğrayıp kimse test yaptırmadı. So the only interpretation that we have is everyone visited the hospital, but no one got tested. And this is where the subject licensing mechanism, form copy, and the height of the if constituent interplace with one another. So here we have the same sentences in 28, 29, and 30, and all of the sentences above have the same underlying structure. It is provided it is provided here. So kimse is the subject of the matrix clause and it is licensed by the matrix negation. And case licensing is also possible. Kimse enters the derivation with a T feature that is unvalued, and little v enters the derivation with a T feature that is valued. So because of the T agreement between kimse and little v, we have valuation. So T feature of kimse is now valued. And the if constituent is merged. So when I join to NECP, kimse and herkes in this position is licensed, is assigned nominative case. We have already seen instances of that. So T agreement happens between the subject of the if constituent and the matrix T. No validation occurs, but these features are now linked. So T probes for a second time, and this time validation occurs, and the subject of the if constituent is also receives nominative key. However, in this position, kimse cannot be licensed by the matrix negation, ruling out the NECP adjunction of the if constituent for 28 and 29. The respective readings are now removed from the sentences. So we can only have herkes as the subject of the if constituent. So having a non-MPI subject, herkes, nothing prevents the NECP adjunction of the if constituent in 30. And little VP adjunction, again, we have case licensing. So when I join the little VP, kimse and herkes is assigned nominative case. We have the same agreement mechanism. So I will just show it. But in this position, the if constituent blocks the MPI licensing in the matrix clause. The MPI, the matrix instance of kimse is not licensed. And when I join to VP, the if constituent does not block the MPI licensing in the matrix clause, and both instances of kimse can be licensed by the matrix negation. And in this position, kimse and herkes cannot be assigned nominative case because the T feature on T only agrees with the T feature on matrix kimse. So validation occurs, and the interpretable T feature on T has no further motivation to probe for a second time to agree with the T feature on of the subject of the constituent. So it is still invalid. Since herkes cannot be deleted under form copy, this rules out the VP adjunction of the if constituent is in 30. So since we have no nominative case on herkes, then it cannot be externalized. But kimse can be deleted under form copy, saving the derivation from having an otherwise unlicensed subject. And this deletion also explains why 29 is ungrammatical. Kimse hastaneye uğrayıp kimse test yaptırmadı. So we can only have kimse hastaneye uğrayıp test yaptırmadı, single over subject, where we have kimse as the subject of the if constituent and the matrix clause. So no one visited the hospital and got tested is the interpretation that we get. And this is shown, the deletion under form copy is shown here. So I have shown that the subject of the if constituent can be overt when the if constituent adjoins to NECP because its subject is assigned nominative case. Also, I have shown that subject licensing is not possible when the if constituent adjoins to VP. Little VP adjunction must be possible because the if constituent can still host an overt subject when there is no negation. Therefore, there is no NECP. So ben koşup ben oynadım. Such sentences can only be accounted via the little VP adjunction of the if constituent under our account. And conclusion, there are three different adjunction sites in the matrix clause. I already showed NECP, little VP, and VP. And this the licensing mechanism I proposed makes a prediction. And this prediction is that the subject of the if constituent cannot be assigned a case different from the subject of the finite constituent because case assignment takes place from a single key. And this prediction is borne out below where subjects have genitive and accusative case. By the way, the judgments regarding these two sentences vary, so it may not be correct. In 32 we have Hasan'ın işe gidip Ali'nin eve döndüğünü duydum. So Hasan işe gidip Ali'nin eve döndüğünü duydum is off to me. And in 33 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 34 we have Hasan Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 35 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 36 we have Hasan Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 37 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 38 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 39 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 40 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 41 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 42 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 43 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndü sanıyor. And in 44 we have Ayşe Hasan'ı işe gidip Ali'yi eve dönd Ayşe Hasan işe gidip Ali'yi eve döndür sanıyor is also off to me. In conclusion, today I presented my account of deep constructions. I argued for an adjunction analysis. As for the subjects of deep constructions, I proposed licensing via a combination of feature sharing and form copy. And overt YIP subject is only possible when YIP is high enough for matrix T to agree with it first. NECP or little VP works, but not VP. Evidence for this came from MPI licensing patterns and the scope of matrix negation and the interpretation of the constituent. As a result, the finite subject and the YIP subject receive the same case, and this predicts embedded cases where both the finite subject and the YIP subject were genitive accusative case. And these are my references. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederiz hocam. Çok ilgi çekici ve birçok boyutu olan bir çalışma olmuş. Ben tebrik ederim. Şimdi bir
Teşekkür ederim hocam.
soru cevap seansımız olacak. Katılımcılarımızdan soru sormak isteyen el kaldırma butonunu kullanarak soru sorabilir ya da direkt mikrofonu açarak soru sorabilirsiniz. Chat kısmına yazabilirsiniz. Soru sormak, katkı vermek isteyen varsa biraz bekleyelim. Soru olabilir belki.
Tabii.
Şöyle kontrol edeyim ben de. Direkt mikrofonu açarak da soru sorabilirsiniz. Beklerken ben bir soru sorayım o zaman. Önceliği kendime vermiş olayım hem ve fikirde olmuş olabilir belki. Ben şöyle önce bir öneri sunmak istiyorum çalışmanın belki ilerisi devamı için. Bir tane de sorum olacak yine. Ya öneri iyi bir öneri yani işler bir öneri, işleyen bir öneri gibi duruyor. Ben şöyle önerinin desteklenebileceğini düşünüyorum. Diller arası verilere bakarak çünkü yıp ve yıpikine benzer ekler Kırgızca gibi, Uygurca gibi ve birçok Altay dilinde var. Bu dillerdeki ele aldığın çalışmadaki tümce yapılarına bakarak önerdiğin model, feature copy ve sharing, özellik paylaşımı o yapılara da uygulanabilir mi? Ve eğer uygulanıyorsa ya da uygulanmıyorsa Türkçeden ayrılan yönleri neler? Ya da uygulanabiliyorsa bu çalışman için çok destekleyici bir kanıt olur. Hani modelin yalnızca Türkçe'de değil, diğer Kırgızca gibi, Uygurca gibi dillerde de işlediğini destekleyebilir. Hani hiç bakabildiniz mi? Yoksa var mıydı böyle bir çalışmayla karşılaştınız mı?
Yani biraz bakındım tabii farklı dillere de yani şu proposal hani bunlara uyup uymadığına tabii ona tam bakamadım. Genelde şey diyebiliyorum hani farklı işte Kırgızca'da var, başka Türkiye dillerde de var. E,
Uygurca'da da var.
Bu yıp ve beynin boyutunun farklı olduğu olmasıyla açıklanıyor sanki bu öznelerin olup veya olmaması.
Hı hı.
Ve bulunduğu konuma göre de değişiyor. Yani farklı konumlarda da benim çalışmamda olduğu gibi analiz edildiği oluyor sanırsam. Ama çok detaylı bakamadım bunlara. Güzel bir öneri hocam. Teşekkür ederim.
Ben teşekkür ederim. Bir tane daha sorum olacak. Şimdi ben de yüksek lisans tezimdeyken seri eylem yapılarını çalıştım ve orada da yıp ekini ele almıştım. Çünkü yine hem Kırgızca'da hem Uygurca'da ve birçok Altay dilinde bu ekler o dillerde seri eylem yapıları var ve o dillerde seri eylem yapılarını bağlayıcı, connector olarak kullanılıyor. Şimdi ucu çok açık bir ek aslında ve bunu birazcık da sınırlandırmam gerekiyordu. Ve birçok test yaparak alan yazısındaki çalışmalara bakarak bunu sınırlandırdım. Ve şöyle yapılarla karşılaştık. Seri eylem diyebileceğimiz. Şimdi iki eylem bir araya gelip tek bir olayı belirtebiliyor. İşte sizin ilk başta verdiğiniz örnekteki gibi de Ali evi silip süpürdü. Aslında oradaki sil süpür tek bir eylemi yani temizlemek eylemini belirtiyor. Ve ikinci eylemdeki alan tüm uyum eklerini, tüm zamanla ilgili her şeyi ıpın olduğu eylem de alıyor aslında. Şey gibi duruyor sanki bu önerdiğiniz model Seri eylemlerdeki özneleri de yapın olduğu özneleri de uyuyor gibi duruyor model. Yani benim şu an hani çok farazi söylüyorum bunu ama çünkü tek bir özne var. Özneyi paylaşıyor iki eylemde ve hani oradaki öznenin paylaşılmasının altında yatan sistem bu form copy olabilir mi diye merak ettim. Yani şöyle Ali evi silip süpürdü ya da Ali kitabı alıp geldi dediğimizde de tek bir özne var. Özneyi iki eylemde paylaşıyor. Önerdiğiniz model bunda da işleyebilir mi?
Yani bunda da işleyebilir gibi. Ya, evet. Birazcık bu seri eylem yapıları ve bu işte Agent Clause dediğimiz yapılardaki o aradaki çizgi böyle bazen çok şey olabiliyor. Böyle
Evet,
bulanık
karışık.
olabiliyor. Mesela Ali silip Ali süpürdü diyebiliyoruz ama bu sefer seri eylem yapısı olmuyor.
Kayboluyor. Hı
Mesela
hı,
kayboluyor. Böyle aynı analizi uygulayabileceksek eğer sanki bu büyük eyleme beynine eklenmiş bir pozisyonda olabilir belki hani seri eylem yapılarında
hı hı,
bu yıp öbeği. Öyle olursa sadece hani form copy, hani case assignment da olmaz. Hani feature sharing mekanizması, özellik paylaşım mekanizması eğer doğruysa, açıklayabilirse. Böylece hani zorunlu gizli özneyi de açıklar şeydeki, seri eylem yapılarındaki.
hı
Ama
hı,
belki de sadece boyut farkı da olabilir. Hani seri eylem yapılarının daha farklı yapısı da olabilir. Özne taşımasına izin vermeyen komple.
hı hı. Yani şöyle zaten yapı olarak
Hı hı,
iç yapısına baktığımızda o agent clause'lardan yani yapıla oluşturulan agent
hı
clause'lardan
hı,
farklı. Ama hani model olarak sizin önerdiğiniz form kopyayı onu uyarlayabiliriz gibi düşündüm. Dediğiniz şey benim de aklıma geldi. Hani büyük o VP'ye
hı hı.
gelebilir diye. O yüzden sordum. Teşekkür ederim yanıtlarınız için. Gayet tatmin
Rica
ediciydi benim
ederim hocam.
için. Sağ olun.
Teşekkürler
Başka
hocam.
sorusu olan, katkı sağlamak isteyen varsa kaldırabilirsiniz ya da mikrofonu açabilirsiniz dediğim gibi. Tekrar kontrol edeyim şöyle. Evet, şu an yok hocam. Eğer soru da yoksa oturumumuzu sonlandırabiliriz. Tekrar teşekkür ederiz davetimizi kabul edip geldiğiniz için hocam. Sunumunuzu bizimle paylaştığınız için. Bir sonraki konuşmamızda buluşmak dileğiyle. Herkese iyi akşamlar, hoşça kalın.
Teşekkürler beni ağırladığınız için.
Biz teşekkür ederiz.